Welcome to Fraction of a Teacher, the podcast where two trainee maths teachers navigate the wild world of teaching, equations, and everything in between. I'm Francis.
And I'm Jen. Join us as we reflect, share stories, and have a laugh about life in the classroom. Whether you're thinking about starting a career in education, a trainee teacher in the thick of it all, or just curious about what it takes to shape young minds, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Hey everyone! Gosh, feels like forever. Welcome back. Hey Francis.
Hey Jen, it's good to chat and nice to have had a little bit of a break, bit of a holiday. I suppose we're now just slowly ramping up back to new term in a few days' time.
I know. I hope everyone's had a really lovely Easter break. I know I definitely needed it. But it's been really, I say relaxing. It's been nice to have a break and enjoy some sunshine.
Yeah, you've been quite busy though, I think. Which I was going to ask you, and then I thought, no, we should use our starter question, and you can answer what you've been up to on holiday through the medium of a starter question.
Yeah, should we jump straight in? Because I feel like we sometimes spoil it for ourselves, don't we?
So I'm gonna ask you to start. So go on. Yeah, we're going to talk today a bit about how do we use maths in the real world? How do we make maths relevant? So the question for you is, during your holidays so far, how have you actually used maths, miss?
Yeah, so during the Easter break, I've moved house. I've used math quite extensively in terms of time management. So, estimating travel time between my old place and the new place, and obviously then my school, creating a timetable, figuring out effective packing, loading sequences as well, bit of geometry of trying to get furniture to fit through doorway. I'll tell you what, I've never had to think so many ways about how my corner desk was going to fit through 4 doorways. And then was also kind of a bit pre moving in, was thinking about statistics and decision making. So using data like utility bills. So a little bit of data analysis as well. So a little bit of everything.
You've got like an entire couple of lesson plans of just what you got up to in your holidays. That's awesome. I
I
like the
know.
data analysis. That's awesome.
Well, I mean, talk about, I'm about to do perimeter area and volume with my year 9. So volume of boxes for packing, how many will I need? I've got a whole lesson plan on that.
That is awesome. Can you take in a packing box?
I think I might do.
'Cause
That's very gung ho of me. I think I might do.
I think you could. It'd be quite fun. I always think it's cool when you see how big a meter cubed actually is, or how actually calculate a real volume. You could do some stuff.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I'm not gonna say I'm completely done. And Francis can vouch there are still boxes behind me in the
Yeah.
office. We are definitely moved into one place, which is lovely. So we're really happy. So yeah, it's quite
Well
stressful,
done.
but I've really felt like I had a lovely break to do it in. And I have had time to go out and enjoy the weather as well. So I can't complain.
Awesome. I've been really enjoying going out running in this great weather and running. I always track my pace running in minutes per kilometer, and that's a kind of background maths. Whenever running, I'm looking down how fast am I going, how far am I going, how long is it going to take me, have I got time to go a little bit further. Did some lovely running on the coast, which I really enjoyed, going a bit further than I normally do. First application, I suppose, was a bit of speed distance time. We enjoying this sunny weather. We thought we'd get some new patio furniture, so that was there was a little bit of geometry and measurements in that, which was good, and I think it's going to fit the new stuff, which is handy. And then I got to do some work in the loft, put in some more loft boards, so there's a little bit of dimensions of some lengths and area calculations for that, and trying to put stuff up there. But I think the one that it always comes back to is like personal finance. It's come back to buying my kids ice creams, buying takeaway coffees, realizing quite how much I've spent on nice food over the holidays. So when I think about it, pretty mathematical. Oh, and we did a little bit of where we went on holiday, the little model sailing boats, little wooden sailing boats with little sails, sailing those. I think there's probably a bit of maths in the sail balancing and making new sails for them. So, yeah, that was very cool. That's one of my favorite things to do with the kids on holidays. Bit of model boat sailing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We've basically covered the lesson already.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious what we're talking about. And me and Francis were kind of talking the other day, which was just so nice to kind of catch up because it feels like a long time since we've seen each other. And a common kind of question we get as trainee math teachers, and I think most teachers out there may feel like they've had this question before, is, Miss Sir, why do I need this? I don't know about you, but that's probably the most common question I get.
We do get bits of that. I think the way the questions asked is a bit different in my current school to my last school, which is kind of interesting. And I think there's an interesting bit about like why kids, why pupils are asking as well. Like, are they asking out of just like sort of curiosity or habit? It's a bit like when you're on a car journey, the kids like ask, "Are we there yet?" You're like, "Well, no, because like it's a 4-hour journey, and I told you 5 minutes ago we're not there." But it's kind of an interesting, like, is it just a kind of learned response? People just ask the question without really thinking about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess, like, is it the question of, is it a stall tactic or is it actually a genuine gap in
Yeah,
understanding?
I think you're
You
right.
know,
Yeah, is it actually we can get missed talking about something for 5 minutes? That's a yeah. So maybe there's something behind why they're asking. Or maybe it's because they know you're going to have a fun answer. To be fair.
question. What are your usual suspects that you normally get this for? So, for instance, I normally get this in algebra, a little bit of circle theorem as well, and a bit of trigonometry. Those are my usual suspects of when I've had these questions more.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that in terms of this kind of concrete pictorial abstract. But I think for me, the challenge is in algebra when actually it can all just feel relatively abstract. And I think that's where the questions come up because it's really hard to see those connections. Whereas actually, working out areas or volumes and people can imagine that you can use examples that relate much more to the real world. And I think potentially where the maths is tricky, I think there is a bit of a link. Why when people are asking this, I think it's when it feels a bit tricky, and the default is to then, okay, well, why do I even need to know this? This seems tricky. This seems hard. This seems a bit pointless. It's a tricky one, but I think that's where the questions come up. And one thing I have used ChatGPT. I've put into an AI, where are quadratic formula used in real life, and that's been quite a good way of like quickly just generating some ideas that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. So like, for example, quadratics equations in video games and computer generated sort of videos and content. Like actually, that's somewhere where, and you can sort of see that. So I think that's quite a good way if proactively something I've done in some lessons is like try to be upfront and say, hey, this is what we're learning about, and here's some links and some applications. And that's one way I found you generating some of those, particularly the ones that might not immediately come to mind. I don't know if you've done that. You've probably got loads of cool examples of your own.
Sometimes I feel like I wish I had some, like, one-liners, but it really depends. A lot of what I go to is personal finance, and I think because especially when we get to key stage 4, they're gonna be leaving and, if not already having bank accounts and thinking about getting jobs and, possibly apprenticeships. A lot of it I kind of link to that, or I kind of link back to my previous careers and kind of I'm not just being really clear with them saying I'm not using algebraic equations every day. I'm interpreting statistics. I was identifying patterns and I was using that kind of information to help show that math was helping me to understand people and it's not just numbers. And I think that's kind of almost my favorite response to when I get the question of why is this important? It's about not just the numbers or doing an equation. You're making like sense of sometimes the real world in terms of how it's working and how a lot of the kind of systems that we as a Western society have to work in. It's quite statistically led,
No, but I
regardless of your
I
your
think I think that really makes sense, and I think that kind of addresses one of those key challenges in that you're then demonstrating that it's not just like that it's a means to an end, but the end the reason you're using the application is sort of beyond just maths. We're doing all this maths because we're then going to get an answer that will inform real world decisions and impact real people. And I think that's definitely what I felt with my previous career is that actually so many branches of maths, often at quite a basic level, but absolutely came into every decision. If you think of increasingly in organizations, everyone wants to be data driven. We've got to, have analysis that backs up our decisions and investments and so on. You're always really good at that, finding the kind of the people bit and putting that on the front.
That's very kind of you, first of all. But the other thing I really like to focus on is not everything has to be useful for it to be valuable. And I keep wanting to install that in my pupils. Is just because it's not useful right now doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's not. I know that we live in a world where everything is instant, but I'm building you to be, to have long-term success here in the real world for your whole life, not just to get past your GCSE. So you may not recognize the benefit of it now, but I'm going to build grit. We're recognizing patterns. We're building logic. We're building your problem solving skills. That's valuable, even if right now you don't find it useful. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but in my head, that it really sticks with me.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that then also an element of not being too defensive as well, which I think is like, putting something out there and then almost getting on with it a bit and actually showing, because I think there's a real benefit in this, like showing real applications. But I also think there's and I've read a couple of things that sort of talked about this, where you've got, actually we should be sort of, a lot of motivation comes from achievement. So actually, as well as, yeah, you're going to be able to apply this and maybe setting some examples, but actually just getting on and getting on with the maths as well. And I think that for me, we shouldn't be just too defensive about having to, it's great to provide the examples and then get on and do some maths, because I think if they've got an inkling of where it might be used and then feel some satisfaction that they can do it, then I think pupils really, that kind of double motivation really it puts you in a kind of good place. And if you can, one thing, have you tried? I don't know if you've read much about it. I looked at it in one of our assignments. Have you looked at anything? It's a realistic mathematics education. It's something that is used, I think, particularly in Dutch schools, but also been trialed in USA, Indonesia, and it's where
No,
you.
I've heard of it, but I've not done anything about it yet. Can you tell us? Give us a little bit
So
of a 5-minute snapshot.
well, we'll see. Well, I'm just looking back at my assignment, and maybe it proves the value of some of these assignments. But so I suppose traditionally in a lot of maths classes, I think in lessons we start off with kind of some basics. We work up to slightly more complex problems, and then you kind of add in the real world context once you've kind of mastered the concept. The principles, as I understand it, of this RMA, realistic maths education, is you do it the other way around. So you start off by putting out like a real world kind of question with kind of real world context, and then you start working out how you're going to go about answering that. So you effectively put the real world application up front at the start, and then do the kind of theory and then come back to it. And I slightly trialed this. I don't know if it worked, but I was doing like areas of parallelograms and trapeziums with my year 8 class recently, and I put up a picture of a parallelogram shaped building, and there's one in Germany, in Hamburg, and it was quite cool. I put it up as like, right, how would we find out how much glass we need for the side of this parallelogram shaped building? And then we went, and I was like, well, we're going to come back to that. And then we went round and we did some, we talked about how to find the area of a parallelogram. We did a couple of basic calculations, and at the end, I then put the photo of this building back up and said, okay, so in your groups, how much glass is needed? And it was kind of fun because they were like, but so how tall is the building? I was like, I don't know, like how many floors has it got? How big do you think each floor is? And then like, how long do you think it might be? And they just sort of went for it, and they all came out with slightly different answers, which was great. And it was really fun. But actually, so I don't know, that was my kind of first attempt, I think, properly trying to use this, throwing like a real world context up front. I think they quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I love the big idea. I'm all for that. The kind of almost the big focus question. I think. How did it feel to kind of throw a big question out there for you as a teacher? Because I know that that's something we kind of had previously talked about, is that big question, and then teach something and come back to it. How did it feel for you?
I was just thinking, have I got time to come back to this at the end? Oh, yeah, that's sort of like trying to land, finishing your lesson in the right timing. It was good fun. Actually, they're a lovely class. And I think maybe this comes down to sometimes, different approaches with different classes. I once did a lesson about measurements with a year 7 bottom set in my last school. And we did some pictures of some of the world's tallest buildings, and talked about measuring them and how big they were in meters, but what is that in kilometers? And that was quite fun. So I think anything like that, and one of them had been to Dubai and been up the Burj Khalifa, the huge tower, and that was quite cool because he was then able to proudly talk about that. And I don't know, at risk of kind of going way off topic, it definitely engaged them because they were talking about how fast the lift was and the tallest tower in the world. So I suppose used in the right way, maybe there's something there.
But I think is this not the point of why do I need this? I can imagine those lessons. You didn't have the question of why do you need this, because you gave them a really clear real world application of where this would
Yeah,
go.
I think there is something. Yeah, and I think the benefit of that too is that it does, reducing maths and anxiety, for example. It immediately puts, a real world sort of. Well, everyone can look at a building and say it's pretty tall. It's probably between, and then it just allowed people to slightly demystify it. So I think there's definitely a role there in terms of making it kind of relatable and just back to the kind of algebra example, rather than something that just looks abstract and could be quite off-putting. I think if it's not something you're comfortable with yet. Have
Yeah.
you had any? Because I think for your having sort of talked to you about and seen quite a few of your sort of lesson plans and ideas, where do you think the sort of most successful ones have been for you in the sort of personal finance, or in terms of? I mean, have we talked about your shopping list one, your shopping receipt one?
Yeah, we have talked about my shopping receipt one. No, I think definitely personal finance. I used it in my year 10s recently. We were doing percentage increase and decrease. And we talked about a bank offering someone 5% of their deposit that they put into account as like a welcome bonus. And then I got all of I would say this is a low attaining year 10 class.
Yeah.
And I got them to work out and then actually comparing two different banks. And that was really effective because they had already mastered the skill of percentage increase, but actually putting that in the context of a commercial they would have seen online or on the TV. It worked really well. And that
I
was great.
like that. And I think what's interesting is for me, there's like different ways you can do real world. So like that, if you've got that feels like it's something they can relate to. And as you say, like if it's like a real, because I think sometimes when you have a question that tries to put a kind of slightly fake real world context on top of an abstract problem, I think the kids pretty quickly see through that. Whereas what you're talking about
Yeah.
is actually a proper, like genuine example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something like, and it's always not as, I can be honest, it's not always gone well. I remember with one of my year 9 classes, I was doing averages and percentages from tables, and I used US exit poll information to kind of help them understand, and gave them a task of, you're going to analyze this data because it gives so much information, and really breaking it down into kind of where they stood on certain points and where and obviously every state is very different. And I gave that to my year 9 class to almost make them start planning the next election. I remember 2 lessons into averages from tables, they're like, I'm never going to use this. And so I really wanted to focus on something that was crucial to them. And it just went flat on its face.
Oh no.
Didn't go down well at all, didn't understand, weren't interested. But
No,
yeah,
that's so tricky.
it doesn't always work.
And I think that maybe so I'm just planning my lessons for when we return next week. And when you're teaching lessons day to day and you're seeing the pupils and you're working with them and you know where they're at, and I think I'm better at lesson planning. I feel like this week I've been a bit more indecisive and not thinking not thinking of quite such fun ideas or being unsure as to whether they're going to work so well. And I feel like actually, particularly at our stage in our careers, we need to be we need to try stuff and accept that it won't always work. And I think the challenge with that is like, sure, there is a risk that it doesn't go so well, but if it works, it really works and it's engaging. So yeah, I don't know. That's something that's on my mind right now is how can I take a bit more risk and accept that occasionally, like you say, it just doesn't work as well as you hoped.
Yeah. I mean, I then changed the lesson plan halfway through because it clearly wasn't working. Favorite teacher elections in school, and I got me and my mentor to then almost bat off each other to go, well, these are my core principles of I'm going to be teacher of the year, and these are Mrs. Let's have a vote. And then they had them go away and actually then work on my campaign to improve my numbers, and likewise, and they got that so much more. So it
Wow,
just needed to be a bit more relevant to them. But I had to think on my feet to do that. I hadn't planned for that.
that is
But
impressive. Thinking on your
I
feet.
guess what's about being a teacher is, you can find out, and this comes really down to knowing your kids and knowing who's in the room. Because, the more I get to know my classes, the more I would be like, okay, that won't work for them, but this would work with somebody else. So it's
Yeah.
definitely quite nice but try things in quite a safe environment. And, my mentor was like, it was a great idea. It just fell flat because they didn't understand. And that's okay. And that's how our teaching style gets developed.
And if you don't take those risks occasionally, we won't develop. And actually, but what's cool is that you had like the ability to then, switch it up so that you could still sort of recover and get the key points. But it's interesting as well, because that like bringing it back down to a more local context that was more relevant to them. I think that's the other bit. I suppose maybe part of the challenge for people like us who've come from other careers is that maybe the context that we're thinking about, like the things that's on our minds, from work or our personal lives, is I suppose kind of a bit abstract for if we start talking about like household bills or applications in our kind of jobs previously. I suppose there is a risk that whilst that's a real world application, that's not actually one that they can particularly relate to. So I suppose a bit like US election, then you bring it down to like a school council election, or a vote for teacher. Then I suppose maybe there's something about bringing it down not just to real world, but actually real world and relatable.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, have you ever brought your old career into math, or like kind of talked about how you use math and engineering? Because I feel like it goes hand in hand
Yeah,
quite clearly. But have you
I
ever brought it in yet?
a little bit. I suppose I'm always conscious of it being too sort of forced, or there's that bit about the sort of trying to make it really relatable. So yes, with some basic stuff. And I found actually it's almost the simpler examples that rather than sort of anything too complex and technical, it's more even. I mean, a lot of the maths I used to use on a day-to-day basis was pretty basic. We were at 80% fuel level on the ship, and we can't go below 50%. And without having to tell someone because we need to be ready to go somewhere if we're tasked. If we go at this speed versus this speed, how long does it last? When do we next fuel up? Is there a tanker available? What level can we fuel to? Yeah, so actually basics like that I have used a couple of times. I think what I almost need to do sometime is sit down and like think through specific, quite kind of relatable examples from my career where I've used maths, like school level maths, in kind of an interesting context, and like almost write out like some examples and then put them in my notes somewhere so that when I come to teach that thing, because I think sometimes these work best when I think generally they work best when they're sort of thought through and you've got the information to hand rather than making it up on the spot and trying to relate it there. So I suppose I feel like that's a task I should do at some point, is really think through some kind of examples of where I used maths that's relatable really closely to the curriculum in real life, and get some photos and things and just have a kind of a bit more of context on that to help ensure that people can understand it. Does that make sense? Is that something you've
Perfect sense. Yeah, I can see
gone
where
up?
you're going with that as well. Yeah.
Have you done anything along those lines yet?
Well, with psychology,
Yeah.
there is. I mean, there's so much math. Like kind of like I said at the very beginning, I would love to show students that math helped me to understand people. And when I think back to working in kind of cognitive assessment, so how people function in their IQ, math was in my daily toolbox, but not in the way that people think or what people would expect. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't doing algebraic equations every day. I was interpreting statistics. I was identifying patterns in a performance. I was analyzing scores across like interval scales to build a person's whole cognitive profile. And I was using mean tables and standard deviation and comparing results against norms, understand people's working memory and their processing speeds. And so every data point for me was telling a story, and math helped me make sense of that and helped me to understand how that person worked and how they received information, and if there were areas that they were struggling with, what that would look like for them. So, whilst within like my role, it was largely kind of qualitative. So quite a lot of writing, lots of reports, lots of what people were saying. Maths and statistics played a vital role, not only in cognitive assessment, but actually risk assessing. A lot of the kind of interpreting and the validation of tools that we used were based on regression analysis. So thinking about what factors would strongly predict future offending. There's so much math there.
Wow.
So there's a lot kind of to unpick, but yeah. So really quick snapshot, but yeah, I
No.
would love to, but probably more of I would say a higher set year 10, 11 class who were kind of understanding and had done a lot of the math that I would have been doing in more probably A-level math, I would say.
Wow. That feels like there's once you get the as you say, the right pupils, the right level, and the right topic, you could do some really cool real world
Oh yeah.
maths. That is
It's so mathematical. I think there was to make sure the risk assessment you were using was appropriate for the person that was sitting in front of you and you were assessing. There's so much you had to kind of focus on. There was a lot to think of, really.
which I find funny in a way, because I suppose because it's such a people focused um job. I suppose I completely underestimated the amount of maths that there would be in your background career, and I suppose that's maybe something for you know or pupils to kind of understand, is that whilst on the surface most jobs may not look like they involve maths, almost every job will in some way. It's just you may have to sort of think about it a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
That's
research itself has so much mathematics in it because especially if you're doing even the research papers we look at now, the evidence base has to come from somewhere, and they've got to look at validity and reliability, and that's what something we do when we're critically reviewing a piece of research. Is this reliable? Is this valid? Is this a one-off result, or is this something that can be repeated over many other, is this something we see more often? And maybe not specifically with teaching, but definitely thinking about those bigger scale kind of critical reviews that we use. There's definitely statistics in them and results. You think about progress 8 And you think about all the tables, even as teachers, me and you walk in a room and we'll look at our class results from the end of unit test, and we'll use that data to understand if our class got it or not. That's, again, it still helps us to understand people. Maybe not how people expect, but it's not just numbers.
Actually, what's quite funny, you mentioned the test results. My year 9 top set, who are very very bright, very motivated. Once I gave them their papers for recent end of term test. I hadn't added up the marks on the front for them. I let them do that themselves. But it was quite interesting how quickly they started using sort of basic data analysis to compare their marks, and they each had a calculator and non-calculator paper and talking to each other and wanting to know the class mean and how that compared to other class means. And it was just quite interesting, sort of watching their excitement at analyzing numbers when it was their test results against their sort of peers. And there's almost like a maths lesson on that, like given that it was amazing how excited they were to analyze the data and the way they were looking at it and the way they were trying to present it in different ways, and and looking at calculator versus non-calculator and different topics and stuff. So
I was going to say like kind of very similar. So I recently got my students to predict what they're going to get on their end of topic tests before I've marked it, to compare where they think they were, and they also have to star the hardest question. So thinking about a little bit about metacognition and developing those kind of metacognitive skills. But it was so interesting for them and for me to see what they think they got, and then when I marked it, what they actually got. And it was so telling. Again, it really helped me to understand the ones who felt really confident with this topic, and rightly so, and the ones who felt really uncomfortable but did amazing, and vice versa.
yeah, that's that. But I think that's good, actually. That's a good habit. But if you if you had a class like a GCSE class for a couple of years, years 10 and 11, that would be, because I think the second, third, fourth times you did that with them, it'd be really interesting, because they, you'd expect would see them becoming more confident in their predictions, more accurate, and it might help them think as they're revising. Yeah, I suppose it comes back, as you say, that metacognition and how thinking about thinking, how that could really deliver kind of improvements in terms of their results, but also the way they perceive them.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we go back to thinking about the initial question that we were posing ourselves: is Miss Sir, why is this relevant, or why is this needed? I feel like we've just given up so much. You just like ask them to listen to the podcast and be like, hey, go listen to this.
Yep. And we've only scratched the surface of where you could go. But I think it links back to a question we said we'd ask as part of this, which is, but we were talking about maths and whether it's kind of an art or a science. Go on, where do you sit on that question of maths? Is it an art or a science, and how does that relate to our previous discussion?
I think it's a science. I'm firmly sitting that math is a science, probably because of my previous career and my use of math across my whole life. I remember our program kind of coordinator calling that some math is beautiful. And I've never seen math as beautiful. I've seen it as a means to find out information. And I'm an explorer. I like to understand things and understand people and how something works. So for me, math is the science behind that. And I'm going to leave that there because I could go very deep into that.
My answer would have been similar. I don't want to say I'd never really thought about it like that, but similar. Yeah, for me, maths is that incredibly powerful tool almost that allows you to apply it in science, technology, engineering, and my background to sort of make sense of the world, and it allows you to do the kind of analysis that very much puts it in the world of science. And but I suppose, having thought about it, having talked to people who see it much more as an art, and people who've got Bachelor of Arts or Master of Arts degree in maths, I suppose gives that other perspective. And I wonder if perhaps the way we talk about STEM in schools, the way that maths and science are quite closely related, I think, in people's minds, I wonder whether there would be some sort of slightly benefits in terms of marketing it perhaps as the art side of it as well, and whether that would help it feel less threatening for some people. Whether they, there was a really good example of there was a computer coding course at a university in the US, and it was mentioned in a book that I read about marketing. And they had a very low uptake of females taking this course. It was very male dominated. And they changed the name of the module from something along the lines of computer coding to finding creative solutions. And it mentioned sort of coding at the end, but they very much emphasized the kind of creative nature of the content of this module in the coding. And they suddenly had a huge increase in the number of females applying for it. And I think it was interesting because actually the content I don't think had necessarily massively changed, but it was just that perception of, a bit like, is maths an art or a science? Actually, if you put a different sort of label or different perspective on it, does it actually make it much more likely to be appealing to people or them to see the application? So I suppose maybe we need to work a bit of art into our maths and see if it
Definitely. So
has a difference.
it definitely involves imagination, but I think I see it more systematic and it definitely builds on theory for me. And I think about proof. And I think proof to me is a theory, is science. So I think sometimes the terminology we use within math I feel like almost lends itself more to be a science. But I definitely see what you say about the creativity. It can be expressive, but I don't it's definitely something I want to develop is my understanding of that imagination, that creativity, the ability to spot patterns, make a solution look elegant when I think it's quite practical,
Yes, no, I'm with you. I think, yeah, my background is definitely it's functional, but actually, yeah, that maybe I need to be better at seeing the beauty, and I think maybe selling that to pupils as well, and even even in a slightly over the top way. Actually, I think just particularly with the sort of high attaining students, I think that could be quite fun. Really, sort of emphasizing the beauty in the way that I think some of the people on our course and program coordinator do.
Yeah. We should
Beautiful
definitely
sleep.
get our program coordinator on to talk about his view of
I
math being an
think
art.
I think he may have a different view from us, which would be good. We need some balance, and maybe we need to bring an
Yeah.
artist on to talk about maths.
I mean, yeah, sequences in nature, let's be honest.
Well,
Isn't it what Fibonacci sequences in nature? That's insane. Never saw that one coming until I still started teaching it.
and that's, I suppose, another of those, yeah, real world, maths is all around us, and yeah, even as you say in nature, which I wouldn't which wouldn't be my immediate go-to real world example.
Let's just say it's one of those wonderful gray areas that make students really think and teachers really think about their subject.
Be a good little class debate with a higher retaining sort of a higher level class. It'd be quite a nice sort of mini debate almost. And I think most would fall naturally on the side of science, but I could be wrong. Okay, well, one for us to pick up at a later point, as you say, and maybe get a guest with a different view on to evoke some
Definitely.
discussion.
No, I love that.
Awesome. So we have got a few more days of, I was going to say days off, but actually there's a bit of lesson planning going on, a bit of preparing to go back, I think, both of us. And then,
Mhm.
then back into, terrifyingly, the last term of our training, which just feels like it's come around so quick. We've got,
I
literally like
know.
a few weeks in school. And then, all being well, we move on from this, we qualify, and then we become real teachers.
I know. I know. It just feels crazy. But yeah, I mean, this has been I feel like a really good topic to kind of come back on because we've had some time away and actually the fact that we're still using math so much really, I guess, both cements for us that it is a language of the universe in my eyes and still will always be. But yeah, definitely nice something to bring it back into the classroom, especially thinking about I might take a packing box in, not gonna lie.
Do it. Do it. There is your practical use of a real world application of maths. And that probably will look more scientific than artistic, I think.
And I'll let you know how it goes.
That's awesome. How many children can you fit in a packing box? Good luck. Enjoy the sunshine and really look forward to catching up when we get back to uni in just over a week.
Yeah, and just let all of us know we're back to now releasing every 2 weeks. So look out for our next episode in a few weeks' time.
Cheers, Jen. Talk soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to Fraction of a Teacher. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your fellow teachers or friends. New episodes released every Thursday morning at 5 o'clock.
Follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Fraction of a Teacher Podcast for updates, behind the scenes fun, and more content. We would love for you to get in contact with us with your ideas, any questions you have, or things you'd like us to cover. So please email us at fractionoat@gmail.com or message us on social media. Until next time, keep smiling.
And keep solving those problems.